What's up, Internet? Adam Green here with NoMoreNews.org. Thank you all for joining me once again. Today is Sunday, June 27th, 2021. And today we are going to be having a little watch party of the unauthorized history of the American century. This is a new documentary that's out by Expose the Enemy. ExposeTheEnemy.com. John Swen, he's a excellent researcher. He's in the chat occasionally, and he's putting out a lot of great information. You've probably seen me many times in my presentations show these graphics. He's the creator of those, like this one with the Council for National Policy, and let's see, True News on that one.
First of all, I want you to understand that
This is a clip I sent him, actually. This is a Boykin, a Zionist, but here's some more anyway. You get the idea with the graphics. He put out a documentary. See here, May 25th, The Unauthorized History of the American Century. I still haven't watched it, but I've been wanting to. There's part 1 and part 2. It's a total of 60 minutes. I wanted to watch it with you guys without interruption, just introduction, and then we'll take a little bit of a break between the first one. If I have any notes, I'll chat with you guys about it. Maybe read some of the lemons. If you guys have any questions on it, ExposeTheEnemy.com, The Unauthorized History of the American Century. He actually just sent me this article. Facebook director Peter Thiel invests in conservative rival Rumble. Trump signed up for Rumble. This is the YouTube alternative. And Peter Thiel, the Jewish billionaire, PayPal mafia with Elon Musk. Listen, look at what it says here. The site bans content including racism, anti-Semitism, terrorism, and pornography. He added. This is what Peter Thiel says. So it's the free speech alternative to YouTube, but it's going to quote unquote ban anti-Semitism. And you got to love how they throw anti-Semitism in there right next to terrorism and pornography. So no criticism of the chosen people on this new Rumble. Trump just signed up for Rumble. And actually, I shared this article. Where was it? It's from, remember, it was a news story that Trump was in talks. Trump's people were in talks with Gab, of him joining Gab. And then Jared Kushner wanted to monetize it. This is what Torba, the founder of Gab, said. Kushner and Trump's people wanted to monetize it. Trump joining Gab, and they wanted to have stake and ownership of it. And then they wanted him to censor anti-Semitism. He wouldn't do it. He's blown the whistle. And now Trump has joined Rumble. And here's Vincent James, Red Elephants. He's got an article on Daily Veracity. It's his new website. Immediately after Trump joins Rumble, the platform changes its terms to ban, quote, anti-Semitic hate speech. And then we got Peter Thiel investing in, and that's part of the deal. That's part of the deal with the Gab that they tried to push. And now Peter Thiel, PayPal Mafia, says no anti-Semitism is allowed, quote unquote anti-Semitism. Such a joke. Rumble is a joke. BitChute and Odysee is where it's at. Anyway, I just wanted to share that one story. I'll be back with some news, and I'm going to get Björkness back on. I got some rabbi clips I want to analyze with him. But let's get to this documentary. We're already 11 minutes in. And I guess we had the intro, so we're more like 4 minutes in. But anyway, the unauthorized history. I'm going to speed it up. I'm going to play it regular, and then I'll speed it up just so you can hear the voice normal. I'm going to go to like 1.5. That's how I watched everything. Watch everything. Here we go. Helps to make this project possible. Get rid of my timestamp here. Oh yeah, Jeremy Roth Kushel is the narrator for this. He's an excellent independent activist, independent media as well. American Jewish League Against Communism. B'nai B'rith. Oh my gosh, it's all going all so fast. I want to see all these. Bernard Baruch. Mayor John Birch Society. Oh, what a cool intro. I haven't watched this yet. Bernard Baruch, he's a big-time Zionist. American Jewish League. You guys want to watch this without my interruptions? Because I am going to interrupt it now. Chat is in the link is in the chat. Watch it without my commentary. But there's probably going to be a lot of text on the stream. Roy Cohn, Goldberg, Rothberg, Solosky, Trump, Roy Cohn, Robert Maxwell, William F. Buckley Jr.
The way to go on this, I think, is to chart some of these things out, to make some diagrams and draw lines between
Nina Rosenthal
that connect. I think that'll help a lot.
American Security Council Foundation. Wow. Dude, excellent job on this intro. Very professional. A lot of Roy Cohn. By John Swin and narrated by Jeremy Roth Kushel.
The rejection of the 1946 Baruch Plan led to the passing of the National Security Act of 1947. The act merged the Department of War, renamed as the Department of the Army, and the Department of the Navy into the national military establishment headed by the Secretary of Defense. The act also created the Department of the Air Force and the U.S. Air Force, which separated the Air Force away from the Army into its own service. It also protected the Marine Corps as an independent service under the Department of the Navy. The act also officially created the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the uniformed heads of each armed service, that had been operating unofficially during the Second World War. Aside from the military reorganization, the act established the National Security Council, a central place of coordination for national security policy in the executive branch, and the Central Intelligence Agency, the U.S.'s first peacetime intelligence agency. The signing of the National Security Act by President Truman wasn't the only significant event of 1947. 1947 marked the start of a Cold War. The term Cold War was first coined by Bernard Baruch.
Uber Zionist.
It is no coincidence that the man behind the 1946 Baruch Plan, which was rejected by Stalin, was also the first to coin the term. Before World War I, it was said that Baruch was worth $1 million or more. After World War I was over, his wealth was an estimated $200 million.
Profiteer.
In 1916, Baruch left Wall Street and was appointed by President Woodrow Wilson, whose presidential campaign he financed, to the Advisory Commission of the Council of National Defense. And during World War I, he became chairman of the War Industries Board. The U.S.'s economic
Bernard Baruch, ultra-Zionist War Industries Board got us into. He was behind World War I and World War II. And they say who engineered World War I and World War II? He was one of the big players.
And war orders were under the control of Baruch. There is no doubt that Baruch exploited his vantage point and access to insider information for his own personal gain.
Baruch Hashem.
As World War I progressed, Britain and France placed more and more war orders with the United States. The orders became so big that the financial commitment became, to borrow a phrase from the future, too big to fail. Due to his position as chairman of the War Industries Board, Baruch would have been well aware of this situation. Theodore Roosevelt accused Wilson of, quote, sitting idle, uttering cheap platitudes, and picking up European trade, whilst they had poured out their blood like water in support of ideals in which, with all their hearts and souls, they believe, unquote. This financial situation presented to President Wilson changed his perspective on entering World War I. His previous position was to stay out of the war entirely. He famously preferred a, quote, peace without victory, unquote. The U.S. entry would secure an Allied victory and secure the survival of a severely weakened France and declining British Empire, both with a huge debt to pay back to the United States, giving the United States a clear path to becoming the world's prominent superpower.
America emerges over the course of the early 20th century as by far the dominant economy in the world system. The moment, in fact, is 1916, when the output of the continental United States, measured in purchasing power parity adjusted gross domestic product, in other words, inflation adjusted gross domestic product, overtook that of the British Empire. It becomes, in terms of throw weights, the single most potent force in the global economy. As a nation state, compared to all of the empires of the world, the United States becomes the dominant force. What makes America's 20th century history of global power different is that in the course of the early 20th century, America transitions from corralling the scrap territories of other people's dismantled empires into becoming the single power which by itself attempts to balance all of the other players in the global system. So to paraphrase this image, this is the significant transition. When America is not playing power politics with Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines, but with Germany, France, Britain, Japan, Russia, and China. And we can be quite precise about the moment at which that happens, which is 1916. Why 1916? Well, compare and contrast the situation in 1916 with that in 1914. Take Chris Clark's brilliant book, Sleepwalkers, on the outbreak of World War I. I don't think the United States merits a sentence, perhaps certainly not a paragraph in that account. The United States is not a player in the outbreak of World War I. It's a European affair. In 1916, we see the first American election in which every power around the world is anxiously monitoring the American polls. Why? Because it's clear that America is the underpinning of the Allied, more properly the Entente war effort. And the decision of the American electorate as to which candidate they elect will decide the position of the United States in relation to the European war. And that in turn will have decisive ramifications both for the fate of East Asia and for the European balance of power. 1916 is the moment where this occurs. And the outcome from the point of view of the Europeans is extraordinarily dismaying, because they encounter in the candidate who wins, Woodrow Wilson, the American statesman who first, and perhaps most catastrophically, attempts to defy gravity. What Woodrow Wilson attempts to do is to keep the United States out of the war, all the better to discipline and subordinate the warring parties of Europe and Asia to, on the basis of the ruins of the legitimacy of their political systems. If the war can be ended with peace without victory, to erect American hegemony and to place America in a position of dominance, even over the most powerful militarist, imperialist states of the world.
In 1919, Baruch was a member of the Supreme Economic Council at the Versailles Peace Conference and was also a personal advisor to President Wilson on the disastrous terms of peace that would be a major contributing factor to the start of World War II. Now saddled with their newly acquired huge debts, the British and the French sent their delegations to the Versailles Peace Conference to lobby for enormous reparations and further punishment for the defeated countries.
And then at Versailles in 1919, whose anniversary we are commemorating this year, in an effort to create a peace without victors in retrospect on the basis of a war which the British and the French with American assistance had actually won, he crafts a peace unsatisfactory to the Germans, unsatisfactory to the British and the French, and it turns out unsatisfactory to the American Congress, which in the Congress fight over the late summer of 1919 refuses to ratify the peace treaty which the first American president to travel to Europe, to broker international politics, has himself committed himself to. It's a disastrous, shattering delegitimation of the American executive branch, of American international authority, and of the League of Nations institutions which Woodrow Wilson has given his name to. If at any moment American power came crashing down to earth, it was surely this moment, with devastating consequences for the stability of European politics.
The dollar supremacy was established after World War I by America's creditor position. Something very novel happened after the World War I. In every previous war, for instance, the Napoleonic Wars and the early.
It's interesting because the Federal Reserve was set up 1913, just 3 years before. Also, the ADL was set up. Remember, before World War I, there was the Ottoman Empire had control over Palestine for a long time there.
Wars.
And then they got the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
Had been involved with. The Allies had forgiven all of their mutual debts at the end of the war. There was something that the British called shared sacrifice. And the idea was, okay, we're going to have a clean slate after the war. By the way, this goes all the way back to Babylonia in the second millennium BC. Throughout history, there'd been a debt cancellation. There was no carryover of debts, war debts, after the victory was achieved, because the idea was that if you leave war debts in place, that's going to bankrupt the allies that you had during the war, and it's also going to bankrupt the defeated countries and leave them no choice.
Just erase the debt.
The laws of Hammurabi showed this. His whole dynasty showed this. My book on Forgive Them Their Debts is a whole history of debt cancellations and this practice.
The Great Reset.
The United States broke this practice after World War I and said they
go to worldwide crypto.
The amazing thing is that Europe went along with it. And the reason was that it had a pro-creditor ideology. It believed in the sanctity of debts and was not going to...
Who were the usurers?
Because there was a guiding assumption, which is erroneous, that all debts somehow can be paid if only countries will either devalue or transform their...
It was Germany that owned all the money after World War I, right?
Debate with the anti-Germans, with Jacques Rueff of France and with the Americans and Swedish Bertil Ohlin, and he said there's no way that debtor countries like the Allies or Germany can pay their debts to the creditor unless the creditor is willing to buy their exports to provide them with the foreign exchange to pay. That debate. Obviously, he won in reality, but that assumption was rejected by the United States, and that assumption continues to be rejected by the International Monetary Fund today. The junk economics that was brought in after World War I to consolidate the American position to say, of course you can pay, simply destroy your economy and let us take you over and sell out all of your industry and raw materials to us, and that will enable you to pay. This was the American demand and creditor demands have always been essentially, you have to be are you willing to destroy your economy in order to pay your debts? Keynes said this was crazy, and he was right, but Europe went along with it and said, yes, we are willing to destroy our economy. We are willing to have World War II, because rather than question the assumption that all the debts have to be paid. So what Keynes pointed out was that there was a distinction between the budget problem, in other words, taxing the economy to raise a surplus in German marks or British sterling, and the transfer problem, the ability to pay. Well, what happened was that the Allies said, well, if America is going to insist that we pay, we're not going to wreck our economies, we're going to make Germany pay reparations. And as you all know, the result was to bankrupt Germany, cause a hyperinflation there that was only solved by Germany essentially borrowing the money from the United States. German municipalities would borrow the money in dollars for local spending, use the dollars to turn over to the Reichsbank to pay the Bank of England and the Bank of France to pay their dollar debts to the United States. And that was a circular flow. It could only be kept down by the Federal Reserve making interest rates very low here in the United States to promote a outflow of foreign investment. But those low interest rates also created a stock market boom that crashed. In the end, the inter-allied debts had to be canceled, had to be have a moratorium along with German reparations, and the system broke down. There was an attempt to reconstruct the economy at the London Economic Conference of 1933, but Roosevelt scuttled that and said, you know, we're going to go it alone. And ever since, he said, the basic principle of American foreign policy is no other country can tell us what to do. We can tell other countries what to do, but they cannot tell us what to do, and we will not join any agreement in which we don't have a veto power that gives us essentially control of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or the veto power in the United Nations, and any international organization.
Don't talk about bankers too much. It's anti-Semitic.
Well, in 1944 and 1945, America made plans for the post-war economy, and it said, well, in order to have full employment in the United States, we have to have an export-based industry. And now that we've destroyed Germany and Japan, our major enemy is the United Kingdom. And it was very clear that America's enemy immediately on the ending of World War II was not Russia, not the Soviet Union, but England. And it developed a strategy that was designed to essentially bankrupt England with a British loan, to force England to accept, to end imperial preference, to break up its empire, to make it, to free the about 10 billion pounds of sterling for spending not in England as block currency, as the British Board of Trade had expected, but to spend it in the United States. So England was stripped of all of the blocked currency, stripped of the currency area, stripped of the empire that became absorbed into the dollar area. And in fact, the arrangements were so one-sided that America created in 1945 that by 1950, it actually had drawn another $5 billion worth of monetary gold into the United States out of Europe. There was the refugee flight of gold in the 1930s. It was followed by a post-war flight out of Europe, as they said, America's strategy is to bankrupt Europe. It's going to win. Let's move our money into the United States.
Destroy Edom. Build up Edom and destroy it.
Under Baruch's leadership, the military was furnished with equipment from what developed into the private defense industry. This informal alliance is known today as the military-industrial complex. With the development of a powerful defense industry came a new entity driven by business and profit, where demand is created by conflict, wars, and the hyping of national security threats. With the defeat of the Axis powers and Stalin's rejection of the Baruch Plan that involved a plan to develop a world military, a new justification was needed to keep the military-industrial complex's wheels turning.
Well, in 1944 and 1945, America made plans for the post-war economy, and it said, well, in order to have full employment in the United States, we have to have an export-based industry.
Okay, I guess that's part one is 20 minutes, and then part two is 40 minutes, so let's start there.
The Hollywood blacklist came into being in 1947 when the House Committee on Un-American Activities began to summon certain Hollywood film industry figures on the suspicion of their works being communist-inspired. As the media began extensively covering these hearings, 10 of these Hollywood film industry figures began to be dubbed the, quote, Hollywood 10, unquote. For the duration of the hearings, the 10 refused to cooperate, maintaining a position that the questioning violated their rights under the Constitution. Due to their lack of cooperation, the Congress voted to approve contempt citations. All were sentenced in 1950 to serve time in prison for up to a year, fined $1,000, and blacklisted from Hollywood. The committee never claimed to find evidence of communist propaganda in any American movies. Throughout the war years and into the 1950s, the movies stayed overwhelmingly pro-American and anti-communist. The facts are that patriotic themes have always been Hollywood's bread and butter, not because Hollywood necessarily believes in the ideals, but because such themes were highly profitable. Ironically, from the onset of Hollywood, the movie moguls were intent on creating and marketing the American dream, that they could sell to a largely Anglophone audience, completely unaware that they were being sold this vision from an almost exclusively Jewish conglomerate. This is one of the reasons why many of the figures associated with the Hollywood film industry changed their names to conceal their Jewish identity. This is verified by Jill Sherry Robinson, the daughter of Dor Sherry, the MGM production head and chairman of B'nai B'rith's Anti-Defamation League.
Ooh. Oh, MGM is connected to B'nai B'rith? What? Of course. Barry and Shayer. Leading figure at MGM from 1924. MGM Studios. Both men were members of B'nai B'rith. What? After working under David Selznick until 1946, Scary went on to RKO Studios, working as the head of production for rehired at Mayer's vice president at MGM, and later became Mayer's successor as president of the studio. And they're both B'nai B'rith. MGM, wow. MGM, the Lion of Judah? They do have a lion, huh?
Hollywood's Chosen People, The Jewish Experience in American Cinema, by Daniel Bernardi. Jill Sherry Robinson is quoted as saying the following, quote, "The American dream is a Jewish idea. It's Jewish revenge on America because it combines the Puritan ethic with Baroque magnificence. The happy ending was the invention of Russian Jews designed to drive Americans crazy," unquote. This high-profile event, resulting in the Hollywood blacklist, not only set precedents and conditioned the public that communism was the new enemy of the newly established national security establishment, it also sent a clear message to Hollywood that they were a target for absorption into the military-industrial complex apparatus. Don Baruch was the brother of Bernard Baruch. In the 1930s, Don produced 4 off-Broadway plays and then worked in LA for Hal Roach Studios and MGM and later Paramount in New York. During World War II, his brother Bernard served as the special advisor to the director of the Office of War Mobilization. His offices at the time were at 120 Broadway. Meanwhile, Don served in Washington, producing training videos for the armed forces. He continued working in this office until the formation of the Department of Defense in 1949, at which point, until his retirement in 1989, Don served as the motion picture production branch chief in its various iterations under the office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, OASD, PA. With the establishment of the Department of Defense in 1949, the responsibility for approving military assistance to films and overseeing the process with them came under the direction of Don Baruch's new office. In the parlance of the DoD, the assistance given is referred to as cooperation. Baruch and the staff in the office acted as intermediaries between the film industry and the armed services.
You always hear it's the CIA, but now it's B'nai B'rith.
Coast Guard, Reserves, and National Guards. Over the course of Don's 40-year career with the Pentagon, he was involved with hundreds of projects, including From Here to Eternity, The Caine Mutiny, The Longest Day, In Harm's Way, The Green Berets, Patton, The Right Stuff, and Top Gun. Interestingly, both Donald and Bernard Baruch were connected to other figures in the anti-communist movement. One of the key figures that linked both of the Baruch brothers was Maury Riskin. During the 1930s, both men worked for many of the same studios when Donald was a film producer and Maury was a screenwriter.
Screenwriter, the Marx Brothers, Paramount, American Jewish League Against Communism. Personal friend of William F. Buckley. John Birch Society. National Review. Okay. Well, they were kosher. John Birch Society, too.
According to Norman L. Marks of the American Jewish League Against Communism, the principal financial contributor to the AJLAC was Mr. Bernard Baruch, contributing about 85 or 90% of the funds. Mr. Marks also stated that Baruch was very emphatic about not having his name appear on the letterhead and that his financing of the group was to be kept secret. Riskin,
just a conspiracy.
Ronald Reagan, Ayn Rand, and John.
Nobody secretly funds things, Goyim. That's just a conspiracy theory. Disney didn't Disney like say that there was a bunch of communists? He testified.
John Wayne were all members of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation
Libertarians. Ayn Rand.
Walt Disney was a founder and also served as the first
Zionist,
VP
Reagan.
of MPA-PAI. It is important to note that some of the reasons why filmmakers moved out west to Hollywood was to escape regulations, taxes, and union labor costs. In the 1930s, a rise of labor unions took place in Hollywood in response to the Great Depression and subsequent mistreatment of employees by studios. Throughout the 1940s, a major wave of strikes took place across the United States. This included the Disney animators' strike in 1941. As a famously autocratic employer, Walt Disney responded to the 5-week strike by firing many of his animators, but was eventually pressured into recognizing the Screen Cartoonists Guild, SCG. Still bitter from this outcome, Disney joined together with his fellow movie mogul members of the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers and Motion Picture Associates.
Recipient of Beverly Hills chapter of B'nai B'rith's Man of the Year in 1955. And remember, B'nai B'rith is the parent company of the ADL. Waldorf Statement, Hollywood Blacklist. Okay.
Association of America, and loyal established Hollywood stars to form the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. This organization provided many of the quote-unquote friendly witnesses to the HUAC hearings, framing any resistance to these autocratic practices as quote-unquote un-American and quote-unquote commies. In 1941, Walt Disney's problems were piling up. Besides the animator strike, Disney's third animated film, Fantasia, was a flop and ended up nearly bankrupting the studio.
Fantasia was a flop. I thought that was like a classic. Pinocchio was a loss too? What?
The studio's previous film, Pinocchio, had also lost money, and growing discontent among animators added to Disney's woes.
Wow. I watched Pinocchio over and over and over again as a child. Not a box office success. Wow, this is blowing my mind.
But the bombing
it's been so long since I've seen it.
Disney a lifeline. On December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed, and America found itself at war. On the same day, Walt received a phone call at home, letting him know that the United States Army was moving on to his studio lot. The U.S. government, recognizing the value of the studio's emotive visual storytelling techniques, contracted Disney to produce 32 animated shorts. The commissioned films were a mix of education and propaganda, and it was the latter to which the full weight of the creative studio of animators, artists, directors, and writers would be employed. They took animation beyond pure entertainment, using it as a medium to influence and persuade. The integration of the military went so far as drafting artists to do their military service at Disney's studio due to the amount of work that needed to be completed. At the time, around 1/3 of Disney's workforce were drafted participants. During the war, production of
the social engineers, the programming, the subliminal messaging, the propaganda has been laid on people so heavily.
Studio increased from an average of 3,000 feet of completed film per year to 300,000.
This is so good. Isn't this professional, these guys? Great job. This is Jeremy Rothkushel and ExposeTheEnemy.com, John Swin, that made this.
The studio was operating 6 days a week.
Support them. This is great work. Support, when people put a lot of time and effort into something like this and put together something really good, support it. They need your help. I can guarantee it.
Plus 2 nights of overtime. This was huge business that changed Disney's outlook completely. With a new client with deep pockets like the US government, Disney saw his relationship with the government and military as the most important. Understanding the studio's role as a mouthpiece for government talking points were good for business.
Anti-Nazi propaganda.
His leadership also helped redefine his public image from an autocratic to a patriotic leader to the masses.
Wow. What?
Disney also obtained...
Hold on. What? Anti-Nazi propaganda of...
role as a mouthpiece for government.
What is this? Daffy Duck? What's his name?
This relationship also helped redefine his public image from an autocratic to a...
Who's that? I can't remember. DuckTales? With his swastika
patriotic
on his wall? Doing Romans?
Gained the power to cement his dominance, not only in the industry, but in the studio, as well as the ability to go after his critics in the workers' rights movement under the guise of fighting quote-unquote commies and making inroads with political powers.
Like the Zionist Bolshevik dialectic.
I for president, I for president, I for president, I for president.
Meanwhile, they're working together, controlled by the same people at the top.
Beat the drum, we'll take I to Washington. We don't want John or Harry, let's do that big job right. Let's get in step with the guy that's step, get in step with I. You like
Donald Duck.
what
did I say, DuckTales?
Beat the drum, take I to Washington.
Disney also had a vested interest in the promotion of the threat of communism, knowing the Cold War would lead to more government contracted work.
A lot of space.
Here to introduce you to this new series is Walt Disney. In our modern world, everywhere we look, we see the influence science has on our daily lives.
It is now X minus 2 hours.
Man's oldest dream, the desire for space travel.
Will be a rocket-powered ship that will finally take man into space.
The conquest of space.
Report aboard a rocket.
Oscilloscope, radar scope, computers, tracking devices, a brain and nervous system for the rocket. Now man will bet his life the unknown risks, dangers of space travel. You see the Earth as a vast rolling sphere, now coasting freely and silently through space.
Reacts violently to a sudden decrease in pressure.
The sensation of weightlessness 22 hours after takeoff for the first time. It is now time to make one glide back to Earth. After coasting halfway around the world, the rocket will leave the vacuum of space. The captain will be able to fly the rocket as a normal plane. Test now the rocket continues the long glide down into the lower atmosphere. Man has taken his first great stride forward in the conquest of space. Mission completed.
According to Mark Elliott's biography, Walt Disney, Hollywood's Dark Prince, backed by government documents,
What's that?
Disney was a long-term FBI informant and was in contact with J. Edgar Hoover from at least 1936. Because of information Disney provided the Bureau, he was made a, quote, full special agent in charge contact, unquote, in 1954. An SAC contact was usually a trusted informer who could provide transportation and equipment, as well as public relations services to the Bureau.
Disney's FBI file highlights the effective 1-2 punch of the FBI's Cold War tactics, an aggressive public relations campaign, and sweeping program of invasive and illegal surveillance. Oh, I love how the story that maybe a month ago, the post office is doing all this vast dragnet spying on the internet. It's just like a non-story. I haven't even seen anybody cover it. Just the mainstream media ignored it. The post office spying on us. FBI, so yeah, totally tied in. CIA, B'nai B'rith, FBI. In 1947, the same year, J. Edgar Hoover and Walt Disney struck up their long friendship. The House Un-American Activities unveiled their first Hollywood blacklist. This friendship was initially situated on Disney's eagerness to inform the FBI on how communist infiltration had caused something.
Disney was not the only important informer in Hollywood. While president of the Screen Actors Guild in 1947, Ronald Reagan was designated, quote, source T10, unquote, by the FBI, meaning he was a confidential source with the codename T10. Elliott's biography also highlights Disney's right-wing politics, including his support for Barry Goldwater and referring to Charlie Chaplin as a little commie. Wayne was a Hollywood-created American hero icon due to his starring roles in popular westerns and war movies. This image would be useful not only at the box office, but for propaganda purposes as well. Wayne's membership in Disney's Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals helped Disney emphasize his desired pro-America image to disguise his personal agenda of opposing workers' rights that opposed his autocratic business practices. Using popular culture figures to highlight and exaggerate communist influence in Hollywood and associating it with workers' rights groups re-emphasized John Wayne's patriotic image that had been reinvigorated in a militaristic fashion. Between 1940 and 1945, as World War II raged on, John Wayne starred in 7 war movies. Ironically, in 2015 biopic film Trumbo, on the topic of the HUAC hearings and Hollywood blacklist, it depicted a real-life confrontation where Trumbo questions John Wayne's patriotism by questioning his lack of military service.
Where did you serve again? You trying to say something?
No, Duke, he wasn't.
Stay out of it, Eddie.
If you're going to talk about World War II as if you personally won it, let's be clear where you were stationed. On a film set, shooting blanks, wearing makeup. And if you're going to hit me, I would like to take off my glasses.
Doing all the propaganda, though.
Dude, come on, let's get out of here.
Been important for the war effort. Can't you at least salute like you've been in the service? He walked off the set. John Wayne did dodge the draft so he can continue his affair with sexy German actress. Oh, hold on.
The subject of interest that surrounds John...
Dietrich.
The subject...
Oh my god. Best lit I ever had, new book reveals. Oh, he liked a German girl.
That surrounds John Wayne to this day is his relationship with the armed forces. Not only due to Wayne's lack of military service that has been questioned more than once. Despite being registered for service during World War II, Wayne received a 3A deferment for, quote, family dependency, unquote. This, however, all distracts away from the information that Wayne received a personal, quote-unquote, thank you in regards to Wayne's application to join the OSS, an acceptance letter into the service from Wild Bill Donovan. The letter mentions Wayne as being part of the, quote, field photographic unit, unquote, of the Office of Strategic Services. This letter was intercepted by Wayne's estranged ex-wife, who didn't pass it on to Wayne, and the revelations were only publicly revealed at a much later date. The extent of Wayne's work and what exactly Wayne's work involved is still in question. Wayne did tour U.S. bases and hospitals in the Pacific for 3 months in 1943 and 1944. During this trip, he carried out a request from Donovan to assess whether General MacArthur, commander of the Southwest Pacific area, or his staff were hindering the work of the OSS. Donovan later issued Wayne an OSS Certificate of Service to memorialize Wayne's contribution to the OSS mission. Along with these revelations and considering Wayne's role in many World War II movies, it increasingly looks like Wayne was the go-to man for war-related propaganda films. When talking about his deferrals in World War II, Wayne is quoted as saying, quote, I thought I could do more for the war effort by staying in Hollywood, unquote. This only adds fuel to the fire. Another connection to the OSS comes via the filmmaker John Ford, who gained notoriety for his Western films with John Wayne. Ford was the head of the OSS's Field Photographic Unit, the same unit Wayne was a part of. During the war, the OSS greatly assisted Ford in the creation of the films Battle of Midway and December 7. Both films would go on to win Oscars for Best Documentary.
Imagine.
Amazingly, the OSS's
what a coincidence.
Included a secret operation to get Ford to Midway to document the battle. On top of this information, there are links between Wayne and Don Baruch's motion picture production branch at the DoD.
Oh.
As the Vietnam War continued,
Baruch and
it
Benai
became
Brith.
increasingly unpopular with the general public, and selling a pro-war narrative became increasingly difficult. It also became very hard for the Pentagon to convince filmmakers to pursue that direction due to the uncertainty of a pro-Vietnam War film's popularity and profitability. Regardless, Wayne directed The Green Berets, 1968, the major pro-Vietnam War film made during the war with, quote, cooperation with Baruch's office. It was during the 1960s that the DoD Film Liaison Office's activity first peaked. The main assistance criteria were elaborated, the Pentagon's policy towards cooperation with filmmakers was outlined, and the quote-unquote rules of the game were established. The office's representatives even moved to Los Angeles to be closer to Hollywood in an effort to ensure the positive image of the armed forces. In 1934, Ford was commissioned as a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve. 6 years later, in 1940, he began gathering a reserve unit of experienced Hollywood filmmakers for his unofficial Naval Reserve unit that would become to be known as, quote-unquote, John Ford's Navy. His recruits for the Naval Field Photographic Unit, known simply as Field Photographic, were some of the best talents in Hollywood. They included writers Garson Kanin and Bud Schulberg, cinematographer Greg Toland, editor Robert Parrish, and special effects expert Ray Kellogg. In October 1941, the unit was transferred to the Office of the Coordinator of Information, COI, the predecessor of the OSS by Colonel Wild Bill Donovan. Ford and 30 of the men from the reserve unit became the official Field Photographic Division of the COI, and the unit was assigned an operating budget of $5 million for its first year. The name of the unit was later changed to the OSS Field Photographic Branch. Ford's initial job was to produce documentary films. The unit's charter was later expanded. They created OSS training films and documented OSS activities in the field.
That's the same logo as Special Operations Command on all the pins that Alex Jones in Florida talks about.
Some of the activities documented included OSS Detachment 101, the paramilitary unit that operated behind Japanese lines, and the landing in Normandy in June 1944. Ford was discharged with the rank of captain and later continued his service as a rear admiral during the Korean War. Ford received a Purple Heart after recommendation from Wild Bill Donovan. What happened to the OSS's Field Photographic Unit once the OSS ceased to function? We can assume the unit was absorbed by the Motion Picture Production Branch of the Department of Defense operated under Donald Baruch as the Pictorial Branch. There is also a connection between John Ford and Donald Baruch worth mentioning. Ford received first priority from the Department of Defense, DoD, to film a story about Commander Frank Wilbur Spig, Weed, months ahead of an attempt by Warner Brothers Pictures Distributing Corporation. Priority permission to Ford was granted by Donald E. Baruch, Chief, Motion Picture Section, Pictorial Branch, DoD.
Wow, Baruch's brother. B'nai B'rith brother. When you got connections like that, you can say that the Zionists are behind. When B'nai B'rith is connected like this, Zionists are behind the war machine. Hollywood. B'nai B'rith in Hollywood. I heard there's a lot of Roy Cohn. That must all be coming up soon.
The motivation for the HUAC investigations and Hollywood blacklist was also likely linked to MGM's financial troubles post-World War II. The post-war years saw a decline in profits from MGM and the other studios. The number of high-grossing films in 1947 dwindled to 6, compared to 22 a year earlier. This resulted in the company making a loss for the first time in their history. The Hollywood blacklist would be a useful tool for the established studios. It provided the opportunity to blacklist competitors and talents not under contract to the big studios, who would potentially be a threat to the company's bottom line. On the other hand, the studio could blacklist contracted talent whose contracts they no longer desired to honor in these financially strained times. Mayer was pressured to tighten expenses by the studio's parent company, although Mayer's reputation as a quote-unquote big picture man would make that difficult. So, the blacklist would be a win-win for Mayer and MGM. In order to understand Mayer's power in Hollywood, it is important to note that Mayer helped create what is termed the Hollywood quote-unquote star system, At one point, he explained the process he went through in creating a star. The idea of a star being born is bourgeois. A star is made, created, carefully and cold-bloodedly built up from nothing, from nobody. All I ever looked for was a face. If someone looked good to me, I'd have him tested. If a person looked good on film, if he photographed well, we could do the rest.
Whoa.
From this, we can assume that Hollywood stars were well aware that they were creations of studios. And the
Harvey
power
Weinstein. Ah.
One example of this power is an encounter with a disgruntled Mickey Rooney, who refused a request of Mayer regarding his public behavior. In response, Mayer grabbed Rooney by his lapels and said, quote, "Listen to me. I don't care what you do in private. Just don't do it in public. In public, behave. Your fans expect it. You're Andy Hardy. You're the United States. You're the Stars and Stripes. Behave yourself. You're a symbol." Unquote. Mickey nodded. Quote, "I'll be good, Mr. Mayer. I promise you that." Unquote. Mayer let go of his lapels. "All right," he said. Mayer's controlling behavior wasn't the only abuse of power he exercised.
Oh, no.
According to Judy Garland, Mayer molested her when she was a child star working for MGM.
No. What? What a photo. Well, this is getting a little dark with this guy now. Of course.
Her when she was a child star working for MGM.
Oh, man. Judy Garland accused Mayer of groping her and of making her sit on his lap. So creepy. Garland claimed that Mayer frequently told her to sing from the heart by placing his hand on her chest. Garland claimed that he called her his little hunchback. And didn't this girl go on to like be a drug addict too and have messed up life, and forced her to take diet pills so she would slim down? Yeah, that's right. She got addicted to the pills. It's believed that the bad habits he instilled in her what led her to her death at just 47 years old. Disturbing. And on the Weinstein thing. Look, I saw this the other day. This is funny. You remember the movie Tom Cruise was in called, what was it called now? I guess, Tropic Thunder. He played this character.
How the character would look.
I'll play it here. Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise apparently came up with the look of Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder himself. Apparently, he used Harvey Weinstein as inspiration for how the character would look and act. He also insisted with Ben Stiller that he be given giant fat hands covered in hair, wear sunglasses, and have an affinity for dancing to hip-hop music.
Pretty funny that Tom Cruise
of Les Grossman in Tropic Thunder himself.
Les Grossman.
Apparently, he used Harvey.
What a name, like Les Wexner in Epstein. Grossman, gross man. Too funny. Classic.
Well, we haven't had that problem in our studio. I heard Mr. Warner testify this morning. He says he's had it, but I can't say that I've had it.
Well, I understood you to say that it's impossible for them to get material into the pictures because you have a number of readers and other individuals that are that are always checking on it, that you yourself recently observed some information that might be, although under the circumstances of the writer it obviously wasn't. Now, what I would like to determine from you is what do you think will happen in a period of 5 or 10 or 15 years if these individuals keep on infiltrating 1, 2, or 3, or 4, and at that time we maybe won't have individuals that can keep this information out of the pictures?
I'm just hopeful, like I told you, Mr. Smith, in California, that perhaps out of this hearing, our Congress, recommended by this committee, will have legislation, there can be no question, and give us a policy how to handle American citizens who don't deserve to be if they are communists, to get them out of our place.
No evidence of infiltration. It's crazy, like it's like how social media calls people terrorists now or anti-Semites, and they say you're not allowed to have a voice. Like you're not allowed to make a movie because we say that you are something. It's definitely not free speech. Looking for Congress to give Hollywood studio leaders power to control and who cannot be in the industry. When Mayer's illogical assumption that people who have directly benefited from the freedoms they have want them to be taken away is questioned. It's Jews saying, let us give us a control about who is allowed to make movies and who isn't. Baruch, and which the ADL did. I've read about the ADL having to give approval and shutting down movies and scripts and stuff like that, having a lot of influence with B'nai B'rith over Hollywood and the propaganda machine and entertainment. Many they are mentally off. Oh, he called them cracked. Sacha Baron Cohen. ADL, yeah. Throw the ADL down the well.
And to seek to destroy this free American government that has afforded them their opportunity and has given them a place in the sun and positions of power and affluence.
My own opinion is, Mr. Congressman, I've so expressed many times in discussion, I think they're cracked. It can't be otherwise.
Cracked? Is that a diss?
Amazingly, Louis
Boycott
B.
Nazi Germany.
Appearance as a friendly witness at the HUAC hearings wasn't his earliest connection to HUAC.
Hold on.
An earlier iteration of HUAC headed by
Hold on. That was too quick. Got to read that. It's a lot of every single time situations here. We see boycott Nazi Germany. Representatives of the American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, and the American Jewish Congress met in New York. The representatives established a joint committee to monitor the situation, like Trump, in Germany. On March 27, 1933, the joint committee coordinated rallies promoting the mass boycott of German goods at Madison Square Garden, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and 70 other locations. Wow, is 70 a special number? The New York rally was broadcast worldwide.
Appearance as a friendly witness at the HUAC hearings wasn't his earliest connection to HUAC. An earlier iteration of HUAC headed by Congressman Samuel Dickstein focused on Nazi-related un-American activity from 1933
Dickstein.
And conditioned the public that Germany was their...
You guys ever heard that name before? Dickstein?
...new enemy, and any favorable sentiments toward Germany were quote-unquote un-American.
Leon Lewis turned to the Jews of Hollywood. That's a trope. That's an anti-Semitic trope. Not allowed on Rumble. Special dinner meeting of Hollywood's Jews was called at the exclusively Jewish Hillcrest Country Club. In attendance were MGM studio executives Mayer Thalberg, Columbia Studios Sam Briskin, Paramount Emmanuel Cohen, and Pandro Berman, RKO production. Okay, wow. So it was very Jewish, is what you're trying to tell me here.
American. Mayer, along with fellow MGM executive Irving Thalberg, Rabbi Edgar Magnin, Warner Brothers Jack Warner, Columbia Studios Sam Briskin.
You even got rabbis there? Rabbi Magnin? Come on.
Paramount's Emmanuel Cohen, and RKO production executive Pandro Berman, and other prominent producers and directors formed the Los Angeles Jewish Community Committee, LAJCC. The group financed the private investigations into local Nazi groups and their activities. The man who headed these private investigations, using a network of spies, was Leon Lewis, who raised a substantial sum equivalent to $400,000 from the LAJCC, sought financial support from the U.S. government as well, which was granted by Congressman Dickstein, who also appointed Lewis as the West Coast counsel to the HUAC committee. Lewis fed information acquired by his mysterious spy network to Dickstein's committee, prepared a list of witnesses from the committee's field visit to Los Angeles, and even drafted the questions the committee used to interrogate witnesses. LAJCC's man had significant power in management of these HUAC proceedings. Congressman Dickstein, however, alienated his fellow Democratic Party members with the sensationalist exaggerations and misrepresentation of evidence, as well as his browbeating questioning techniques, and was eventually removed from the committee.
Of Nazis, apparently, because that's what he was going against right here. Anti-Nazi Spies by Rosenzweig.
Significant power and management of these HUAC proceedings. Congressman Dickstein, however, alienated his fellow Democratic Party members with the sensationalist exaggerations and misrepresentation of evidence, as well as his browbeating questioning techniques, and was eventually removed from the committee. The LAJCC financed investigations and findings were not mentioned or included in the committee's final report in 1935, and have never been made public. It was later discovered that Congressman Dickstein was paid $1,250 a month from 1937 to early 1940 by the NKVD, the U.S. allied Soviet spy agency, which hoped to get secret congressional information on anti-communist and pro-fascist forces.
He was working for
Interestingly,
the communists?
two of the Hollywood moguls that spearheaded the financing of Leon Lewis's private investigations, Louis B. Mayer and Jack L. Warner, went on to testify before HUAC as friendly witnesses in regards to communist infiltration of Hollywood. Not only that, both were proponents of the Hollywood blacklist that was a result of the closed-door meeting that they attended at the Waldorf Astoria following the conclusion of the HUAC hearings. Jack L. Warner produced Confessions of a Nazi Spy, the first blatantly anti-Nazi film to be produced by a major Hollywood studio, a film no doubt inspired by the LAJCC financed private investigations.
Mayer and Rabbi Mignon. Rabbi Mignon was known as the Rabbi to the Stars, as the Rabbi of Congressional B'nai B'rith Synagogue, 69 years. B'nai B'rith Synagogue, Los Angeles's oldest in continual operation, was at the heart of the Mayer family's religious life. Oh, so he was religious as well. Magnin was one of the most prominent Jewish leaders in the United States and considered the most prominent for the duration of his strong relationship with Mayer. Mayer donated the arched stained glass windows to the Congression B'nai B'rith Synagogue congregation. Confessions of a Nazi Spy, the first.
This isn't the earliest link between this group of men and propaganda. As early as 1916, Louis B. Mayer had full charge of National Association of the Motion Picture Industry's NAMPI, New England War Campaign, and told Boston theater owners that motion pictures were, quote, the great intermediary between the public and the government of Washington, unquote. Widespread exhibition of films, said Mayer, provided, quote, invaluable aid to the government and its various propagandas, unquote. The resulting media perception was one that Mayer had desired and sought to manufacture, not only for his micromanaged stars and their image, but also for Hollywood, and that was the perception that they were patriotic. Mayer believed more than anyone that shaping people's perceptions shaped their reality.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All these Jews and rabbis.
The use of the perceived threats of communism and Nazism gave the opportunity for this mostly foreign group made up of mainly Eastern European Jews, external threats and ideology to fight against, and in doing so established themselves as patriotic voices and leaders rather than the reality of what they were, oppressive media barons of the establishment.
How Jews foiled Nazi plots against Hollywood and America.
Is the fact that Mayer attempted to censor the motion picture film Citizen Kane. It is important to note that William Randolph Hearst, the media baron of the Hearst Corporation that the film Citizen Kane is based upon, was a mentor and friend of Mayer. Interestingly, Hearst's response to Welles came via his newspapers, accusing Welles of communist sympathies and questioning his patriotism. Mayer went so far to offer a bribe payment to RKO Studios of $842,000 in cash, provided that the studio's president, George Schaefer, would destroy the negative in all prints of Citizen Kane. Whether Mayer was a conduit of Hearst in his bribe attempt hasn't been clarified. Schaefer, however, refused the offer, and in retaliation threatened to sue the Fox, Paramount, and Lowe's theater chains for conspiracy after they all refused to distribute the film. After rival publications to Hearst protested, the theater chains relented slightly and permitted a few showings. In the end, the film barely broke even. Another connection of interest is Mayer's link to the Ku Klux Klan propaganda film, The Birth of a Nation. Mayer made his first fortune from The Birth of a Nation, the controversial 1915 silent film that glorified...
Wow, as if it couldn't get any crazier. He made his wealth. His big first hit was Birth of a Nation. And it's funny, it's like... they have their Hollywood boogeymen, the Amalek bad guys, stereotype archetypes for you, the Nazis and the KKK now.
The early history of the Ku Klux Klan.
They write the script to the villains almost and portray them with their propaganda.
Novel by a Southern Baptist minister who preached racial purity and championed the Confederacy.
Wow. Mayor raised the funds to make Birth of a Nation from Jewish investors. Built a Jewish movie empire built on this. Wow. Still the same agenda, right? Notice there wasn't all the Hollywood films about all the Jewish slave traders. You don't see those, do you? Wow, the first issue that brought national attention to the group. Didn't they play Birth of a Nation at the White House too? Like I remember hearing that. All right, so I've been informed apparently there's a part 3 and a part 4 too. So I think we're just gonna keep watching it. We got almost 500 people here. We're an hour in. Let's see, 30, 20. Can we go another hour? Should we just go 2 hours? Might as well. It'll be shorter even. I'll speed it up. All right, here's part 3. Thumbs up. Expose the Enemy. John Swin. ExposeTheEnemy.com. Excellent job editing this. Narrated by Jeremy Roth Kushel. The Antidote. This is good. The Roy Cohn stuff, too, we're just getting to now. And that's Trump's mentor. Come on. And Roger Stone. B'nai B'rith. I hope it's in here. Roy Cohn is B'nai B'rith, too. He's got connections to it. Look at the ADL and Sacha Baron Cohen and Borat and all their propaganda now, too. Link to all these. ExposeTheEnemy.com.
Tonight I begin to narrate to you a special report of the Executive Intelligence Review entitled The Ugly Truth about the ADL. I want it clearly understood that the hour of the time has stated on many, many occasions that we oppose racism of any kind, in any form, by anyone. What you're going to discover is that the ADL, while calling many, many people anti-Semitic, are themselves one of the greatest racist groups that has ever existed upon the face of this earth. On April 14th, 1865, the day President Abraham Lincoln was shot, will live forever, ladies and gentlemen, as a day of infamy for American patriots and lovers of freedom all over the world. But for the leadership of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the Order of B'nai B'rith and its 20th century secret police arm, the Anti-Defamation League, April 14th, 1865, is a day that will be long remembered for a very different reason. The B'nai B'rith, a pivotal player in the British Freemasonic plot to destroy the Union, was implicated in Lincoln's assassination, something that you've never been taught. That fact does not square very well with its long cultivated but totally unwarranted reputation as a Jewish social service organization. Simon Wolf, 1835 to 1923, was the Washington, D.C. lawyer for the Order of B'nai B'rith during the entire period of the United States Civil War. He would later head the International Order of B'nai B'rith for many years. In 1862, Wolf was arrested by Lafayette C. Baker, the chief of detectives for the city of Washington, D.C., and later Lincoln's chief of the United States Secret Service, on charges that Wolf was involved in spying and blockade running on behalf of the Confederacy. Baker arrested Wolf, who was the attorney representing a number of Jews accused of spying for the South, on the grounds that he was part of a conspiratorial organization working on behalf of the secessionist cause behind the lines in the nation's capital. Conspiratorial organization named by Baker was the B'nai B'rith. Both Baker and United States General Ulysses S. Grant targeted the Order of B'nai B'rith as a Confederate spy agency. Upon taking command of the Western Front in 1862, General Grant issued Order Number 11, which expelled all Jews from the military district within 24 hours.
Whoa.
Its implementation. U.S. Grant was no anti-Semite, ladies and gentlemen. He was reacting to the activities of B'nai B'rith and leading Confederates like Judah P. Benjamin. Lincoln, however, cognizant of the need to avoid blanket attacks against religious or ethnic groups, rescinded the order. The Civil War was actually engineered and brought about by British intelligence through their arm, headed by Albert Pike, the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, whose headquarters at that time was in Charleston, South Carolina.
All the Kabbalists, Freemasons.
The B'nai B'rith authorized biography of Simon Wolfe by Esther L. Panitz offered the following highly suggestive, albeit incomplete, description of Wolfe's personal relationship with President Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth. Bear in mind, folks, that this biography, written on the basis of B'nai B'rith's archives, written on the basis of B'nai B'rith's own archives, paints Wolfe in the most favorable of lights. The mere fact that the author had to include Wolfe's links to Booth and Wolfe's earlier arrest as an alleged Confederate spy and blockade runner implies that the actual story is far uglier. I quote from the history of the B'nai B'rith. Wolfe's concern for culture first expressed itself in the formation of a private club devoted to the arts and humanities and frequented by young men avid for learning. Were pride and ambition his only motives in seeking the intellectual life? Clearly, Wolfe hoped that if he and his friends would devote themselves to the pursuit of learning, they would deflect the prejudicial statements of their Christian neighbors. Wolfe was upset that terms such as money changers, cotton traders, and clothes dealers had become words of reproach. Locally, the group's theatrical productions received a good press. Wolfe, who would often play the ghost in Hamlet or Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, bore an uncanny resemblance to John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's assassin. Earlier in Cleveland, Booth had joined Wolfe and Piexoto in dramatic performances. Years afterward, Wolfe remembered that he had met Booth once again at the Willard Hotel on the morning of the day Lincoln was shot. There at the bar, Booth explained that Senator John P. Hale's daughter had just rejected his marriage proposal. Wolfe attributed Lincoln's murder to this personal tragedy in Booth's own life. Wolfe also recalled that once he sat for a picture entitled, quote, "The Assassination of President Lincoln," end quote. In his own book, ladies and gentlemen, entitled Presidents I Have Known, Wolfe says that he and his longtime acquaintance John Wilkes Booth did some drinking together at the Willard Hotel on the day Booth shot Lincoln. Wolfe's and a second leading B'nai B'rith figure, Benjamin Piexoto's dealings with John Wilkes Booth were hardly cultural. Nor could Wolfe have possibly believed that Abraham Lincoln was killed because of John Wilkes Booth's unrequited love affair. Even John Hinckley, the would-be assassin of President Ronald Reagan, was declared insane when he tried to peddle the line that he had tried to kill Ronald Reagan due to an unfulfilled fantasy love affair with actress Jodie Foster. To understand the circumstances under which B'nai B'rith's Washington, D.C. leader and one of its founding members were circumstantially tied to the Lincoln assassination conspiracy and explicitly linked to the secessionist insurrection against the Union, it is necessary to look briefly at the circumstances under which the Order of B'nai B'rith was founded in 1843. Following the American Revolution, the British monarchy and its East India Company, colonist apparatus never for a moment abandoned their commitment to reconquer the lost colonies in North America. Although the military effort at reconquest in the War of 1812 failed, other efforts to seed the United States with British agents, some drawn from the ranks of anti-Republican Tories who were permitted to retain their citizenship and property in America under the terms of the Treaty of Paris of 1783, were more successful. In 1801, the Tory faction of United States Freemasonry, the grouping of Freemasons who had sided with England during the American Revolution, opened up shop as the Grand Council of the Princes of Jerusalem, of the Mother Supreme Council, of the Knights Commander, of the House of the Temple of Solomon, of the 33rd degree, of the ancient and accepted order of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in the United States. This United States-based British Freemasonic Lodge was chartered in Charleston, South Carolina. The members of this British-led secret society would direct the Confederate secessionist insurrection a half-century later, and other Scottish Rite members would be among the founders of the B'nai B'rith. They, too, would be leading Confederates. Apart from the esoteric mission of spreading an explicitly anti-Christian form of Roman pagan worship and occultism among the early generations of American citizens, the Charleston Lodge also sought to build up a network of pro-British merchants, spies, and politicians in both the North and the South, who would one day play a pivotal role in the reconquest. Many of these early Masons became wealthy through their business dealings with the British East India Company and the Dutch West India Company in both the cotton and the slave trade. Among the founding members of the Charleston Scottish Rite Lodge were many prominent Jews, including Isaac de Costa, Moses Cohen, Israel de Lieben, Dr. Isaac Held, Moses Levy, and Moses Piexoto. Many of these men, ladies and gentlemen, were Sephardic Jews from North Africa or from Spain, who had originally settled in the Caribbean and engaged in the early slave trade. These Jewish Masons set up their organizations, which also maintained active liaison to Great Britain's powerful Jewish community. The Hebrew Orphan Aid Society was one such nominally benign group that would produce one of the most rabid secessionist leaders, Judah P. Benjamin. Although today, any reports of the Freemasonic roots and structure of B'nai B'rith are usually greeted with a torrent of allegations of anti-Semitism, back in the formative years, B'nai B'rith's own magazine, The Menorah, offered the following information about the founders of the group, and listen to this very carefully. Quote, their reunions were frequent, and several of them being members of existing benevolent societies, especially the Order of Freemasons and Oddfellows, they finally concluded that a somewhat similar organization, but based upon the Jewish idea, would best obtain their object. The Jewish religion has many observances and customs corresponding to the secret societies known to us. The synagogue, for instance, might be compared to a lodge room. It used to be open twice a day. For a Jew desiring to find a friend, they had but to go there and make themselves known by a certain sign and token. The sign consisted of a grip with a full hand and the magical word, Shalom Aleichem. The mezuzah on the doorpost was the countersign, Shema Israel. Hear, O Israel, was the password.
Oh my
End
God.
quote.
So kosher.
Indeed.
This series is so much better than I even imagined. It's a shame. Only 600 views. It's been out for like 2 weeks. The Unauthorized History of the American Century, Part 3. Help share these, guys. More people need to see these. They need to see how Judaized and how kosher and how much Zionist control there's always been.
To this day, all local chapters of the B'nai B'rith are referred to as lodges, a practice borrowed whole cloth from the Scottish Rite. When Moses saw some Jews of this B'nai B'rith type who tried to make their religion into a pagan secret society, he took the calf which they had made and burned it in the fire and ground it into powder. And Moses returned unto the Lord and said, O this people have sinned a great sin and made them gods of gold. The majority of Jews in America during the first generations following independence were opposed to the idea of a Jewish Freemasonic secret society. Most Jews are ordinary people like all of you listening, and don't know anything anymore about what's happening in the world than you do. They are lied to just like you are lied to. They are deceived just like you are deceived, and they are easily manipulated because throughout the history of the world, they have been chosen as the scapegoat, as the enemy. And because of that, they can be easily led by organizations such as B'nai B'rith and the Anti-Defamation League.
They scapegoat us, too.
Joseph Benjamin, a noted European Jew, in his memoirs, 3 Years in America, 1859 to 62, wrote of the B'nai B'rith that, quote, this is a secret society like the Freemasons with passwords and the like, and was quite a new phenomenon for me. Still, I think the existence of such a society not at all necessary, end quote.
Secret society.
The secret agenda of the B'nai B'rith, like that of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, was to destroy the Union and pave the way for reconquest.
And it's just so disgusting because this B'nai B'rith is literally like the ADL, and the ADL is just completely censoring the internet, getting people like me banned from PayPal, YouTube, Facebook, everywhere. This group, these very groups that we're talking about here.
The ultimate goal, one world totalitarian socialist government. You see, B'nai B'rith is not the synagogue.
Look at that editing. There's the details. This must have I've edited like this before. Never anything this good, but
the Union and pave the way for reconquest. The ultimate goal, one world totalitarian socialist government.
Instead of socialist, he put Zionist, and we got Trump on the temple coin.
You see, B'nai B'rith is not the synagogue. B'nai B'rith is not Jews.
Come on.
B'nai B'rith is not Judaism.
Sure, yeah, nothing to do with it.
B'nai B'rith is just another organ under a different name of the ages-old Illuminati.
Oh,
The
yeah.
ancient mystery religion of Babylon in secret.
It's not the Jews. Yeah, just everything we're talking about is all Jews. It's Judaism, the Hebrew Torah, the Talmud.
And if you've listened to our series
Kabbalah
on Mystery Babylon,
Kabbalah, Freemasonry.
you know the rest.
Bill Cooper says that Noahide laws are nothing to worry about, and that's just people trying to divide Christians and Jews, and it's just an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Yeah, I'm finding myself disagreeing a bit here with good old Bill Cooper.
Two leading B'nai B'rith allied figures would serve as exemplars.
So it's completely Jewish, according to Bill Cooper. All this is so completely Jewish and Judaized, but it's not the Jews at all. It's the Babylonians, the ancient Babylonians.
Of the strategy for permanently dividing the Union. One was Judah P. Benjamin, and the other August Belmont. Benjamin, who lived from 1811 to 1884, was born in the British West Indies to Sephardic Jewish parents who moved to Charleston, South Carolina in 1827, I'm sorry. He was inducted into the Charleston Hebrew Orphan Aid Society, one of the precursors of the B'nai B'rith. After attending Yale College in New Haven, Connecticut, he was forced to drop out under a cloud of scandal. Benjamin surfaced in New Orleans, where he quickly won the patronage of John Slidell. Slidell, a United States senator who would later play a pivotal role in the Confederacy and sponsored the career of...
Chat is so funny. They're like, I said this 30 minutes ago about Cooper. Boomer Bill, Judeo-Christian Cooper, yeah. It's the Babylonian calm, says Pagan 14.
August Belmont, who married Slidell's daughter. With Slidell's assistance, Benjamin became a prominent attorney, even serving for a period of time in the United States Attorney for New Orleans. Benjamin gained notoriety for covering up the growing terrorist activities of the Scottish Rite-sponsored Knights of the Golden Circle, while serving as the local federal prosecutor. In 1852, Benjamin was elected United States Senator, a post he retained until the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, when he resigned to serve the Confederacy. Benjamin was the first Confederate Attorney General. He later served as Secretary of War and Secretary of State, ultimately running the Confederate Secret Service on behalf of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And as the Mossad does today, he used innocent Jews in the North who were opposed to the dissolution of the Union to furnish information to the intelligence arm of the Confederacy. Judah Benjamin escaped to England following the defeat of the Confederate secessionist plot. It was Benjamin's Confederate Secret Service which organized and supervised such figures in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln as John Wilkes Booth and his accomplice, John Surratt. Benjamin was charged with sedition for the Lincoln assassination, although he was never brought to trial due to his protectus status in England. With the help of a leading Rothschild political asset in England, Baron Pollock, Benjamin continued his legal career in London. He never abandoned his commitment to subvert and destroy the American Republic. However, as a wealthy lawyer for the British merchant oligarchs, Judah Benjamin collaborated with other exiled Confederate and Masonic strategists in England, such as James D. Bullock and Robert Toombs. Benjamin's continuing preoccupation with defeating Reconstruction is indicated in letters he wrote back to the United States with complaints such as these. Quote, I have always looked with the utmost dread and distrust on the experiment of emancipation so suddenly enforced on the South by the event of the war. God knows how it will all end, end quote. And then he went on to say, quote, the South is kept crushed under Negro rule. I can never consent to go to New Orleans and break my heart witnessing the rule of Negroes and carpetbaggers. Nothing is so abhorrent to me as radicalism which seeks to elevate the populace into the governing class, end quote. And that indeed is the sympathy of all of those who call themselves illumined. You see, we are all nothing but cattle, stupid animals, and they are the only ones
who thinks that
mature minds, and thus are the only ones with the right to
only rule. Cattle to serve them.
The Ku Klux Klan,
Esau the hunter,
taught this, but it's
in
the truth.
Field.
The Ku Klux Klan, KKK, was founded in Tennessee in the late 1860s by the Southern Scottish Rite leadership under Albert Pike. The KKK drew its membership from the pre-Civil War Knights of the Golden Circle. Judah P. Benjamin's early role in sponsoring and protecting both the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Ku Klux Klan offers a crucial insight into the B'nai B'rith. ADL's later role in fostering the revival of the KKK in the post-World War II period. We shall return to that sordid tale, ladies and gentlemen, later in this series of broadcasts. another Rothschild and B'nai B'rith ally who enjoyed the political...
Laughing from the chat. Babylonians. So he said Judah might have been right about the Civil War. Now we really do have rule. They can kill us and get away with it. Cooper likes to piss in your face and tell you it's raining. That's a real Christian boomer take from Bill Cooper.
Patronage of Arch-Confederate John...
Look at all these Jews behind bad things, but it's not Jews. They are scapegoated. Don't believe your lying eyes, Goy, says Anaxuna Moon.
Slidell. August Belmont was Judah Benjamin's northern counterpart, a private secretary to the British House of Rothschild who arrived in New York City from London in 1837. Belmont rose to the chairmanship of the Democratic Party, a position he held for 20 years. Belmont...
Pagan 14, they probably created the KKK to use it against us forever. It does feel like it, right? It honestly does feel like that. It almost feels like the Nazis, the Amalek caricature of the Nazis after watching this makes me think the same thing.
Was a leading advocate.
The archetype, the stereotype that they have, that they created, even if it is a manufactured straw man misrepresentation, a caricature.
And states' rights, both cornerstones of the British reconquest scheme. Prior to his emergence as a leading figure in the National Democratic Party, Belmont worked closely with the Charleston, South Carolina B'nai B'rith in fomenting radicalism among Americans' youth. The effort was in this case run directly by the Mother Lodge of the Scottish Rite in England, then under the command of Britain's Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston. At Belmont's behest, Charleston's B'nai B'rith leader, Edwin de Leon, wrote a pamphlet in the early 1850s entitled The Position and Duties of Young American. De Leon, whose family were slave traders, B'nai B'rith founders, and later leading Confederates, peddled free trade and openly advocated a strong Anglo-American alliance. While by today's standards, the appeal for a strong Anglo-American alliance may seem palatable to some, back in the middle of the 19th century, this was borderline treason. Ladies and gentlemen, the phone is ringing off the wall as the fanatics try to get through to deny this. It is the truth. The original research was done by the Executive Intelligence Review. CAGI has duplicated the research down
Masonic Temple
to make sure that this material is true. And it is absolutely 100% legitimate and historical truth from beginning to end. And that's why the ADL and B'nai B'rith has never sued the Executive Intelligence Review over this report. Belmont's Young America members were among the draft rioters and radical abolitionists who disrupted Lincoln's Union.
It's funny how, like, they're at the forefront of all this, but now all you ever hear about is white guilt and white supremacy and white privilege.
Or mobilization to the benefit.
You're not even allowed to mention their role.
During the early phase of the Civil War, England tried repeatedly to intervene into the conflict with ceasefire plans that would have ensured the permanent dissolution of the Union. During the Civil War itself, while the majority of American Jews sided with the North, make sure you understand this, folks, so you know that this is not a racist or anti-Semitic program or report. The majority of American Jews sided with the North and fought valiantly to preserve the Union. The B'nai B'rith was predominantly pro-Confederate. Even in New York City, the lodges preached succession.
They're always on both sides. There's always some on both sides.
Founded by Dutch Jews who made their money in the slave trade, heard sermons by Rabbi Morris Raphael and the following. And he said this, quote, "Who can blame our brethren of the South for their being inclined to succeed from a society under whose government their ends cannot be attained and whose union is kept together by heavy iron ties of violence and arbitrary force? Who can blame our brethren of the South for succeeding from a society whose government cannot and will not protect property rights and privileges of a great portion of the Union?" End quote. Following the Civil War and the assassination of President Lincoln, many of the Jewish slave and cotton traders from the South, typified by the Lehman Brothers, moved to New York City and became prominent in Wall Street banking and stock brokerages. With the defeat of President Lincoln's Reconstruction program following his assassination,
so they went from owning slaves to enslaving the whole world with usury.
Andrew Johnson pardoned the Scottish Rite insurrectionists. Now listen to this closely. President Andrew
We've always done both.
Pardoned the Scottish Rite insurrectionists, including General Albert Pike, and accepted a rank of 32nd degree in the Southern Jurisdiction Freemasons. That was his reward. Suspected Lincoln assassination plotter Simon Wolfe was also absolved of any criminal culpability for his wartime activities. Only non-Freemasons and non-B'nai B'rith were prosecuted for the crimes they committed during the Civil War. The legacy of British Freemasonic treachery against the Union survived intact, including the B'nai B'rith. although the slave trade nominally was banned in the United States as a result of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, a new form of slavery had already been launched by the British East India Company and its Scottish Rite directors, including the same Lord Palmerston who had played so pivotal a role in the secessionist insurrection. The new form of slavery was drugs, opium. Henry Carey, one of the architects of Abraham Lincoln's Reconstruction Program and a leading proponent of the American system of political economy, warned about Britain's opium war against China and India in his 1853 book, The Slave Trade, Domestic and Foreign. Get the book and read it. He described the trade in, quote, that pernicious drug opium, end quote, as, quote, one of perfect free trade, end quote. Defeated in the secessionist insurrectionist plot, Britain and its fifth column of agents in both the North and the South would eventually regroup around a strategy for running an opium war against the United States. As the reader will learn in later chapters, the B'nai B'rith and its Anti-Defamation League's secret lodge played a central role in the drugging of America.
Oh, and the Sackler family and all the drugs that are brought in now. Okay, now we're going to part 3. What do we have, 20 more minutes? Yeah, no, a 40-minute one. It'll probably take 30 minminutes, though. We're at 1.5. Oh, wait, where are we?
As we told you at the top, right before we came on the...
Oh, of course, it shows me Fox News right after, even though I never watch Fox News. Of course. All right, part 4, The Unauthorized History of the American Century by Expose the Enemy, John Swin, exposetheenemy.com, narrated by Jeremy Rothkushel. Part 4 is going to be about Roy Cohn now. Iron Metal says, God bless you, miss you on FraudTube. Yeah, well, we're still streaming. We're still putting out videos. What you can't say that, Duvel. Thank you for the diamond, but you can't say that. All right, here we go. Yeah, this is where we find out it's all the Chi-Coms. Joseph McCarthy.
Joseph McCarthy came to prominence in the 1950s. His eventual successful Senate campaign was dogged by a smear campaign, which was later revealed to be partly projection from McCarthy. One of McCarthy's attacks included claims of war profiteering by his opponent. McCarthy himself made a fortune from stock market investments during the Second World War. It is still unclear exactly where McCarthy acquired the investment capital to make such investments. McCarthy's campaign funds came from out of state and amounted to 10 times that raised by his political opposition. Ironically, McCarthy benefited from a Communist Party vendetta against his opponent and helped him win the race. McCarthy ran a hawkish pro-military platform, adopting the moniker tail gunner, referring to his military service that assisted in creating a patriotic and no-nonsense persona.
Oh, they lied about his war history? Oh, so they completely made up a fabricated his tail gunner Joe history. Public relations officer gave him the record, and wrote up a press release for the papers. He was handled by
years in the Senate were unremarkable.
Roy Cohn,
a popular speaker, invited by many different organizations covering a wide range of topics. His aides and many in the Washington social circles described him as charming and friendly, and he was a popular guest at cocktail parties. He was far less well-liked among fellow senators, however, who found him quick-tempered and prone to impatience and even rage. Outside of a small circle of colleagues, he was soon an isolated figure in the Senate.
Joseph McCarthy was only 40 in 1950 when he came to Wheeling. He was not a well-regarded senator at that time. He had a penchant for calling his fellow senators names. He was always a rather rumpled, had an edge to him. But he was at the height of his power in a sense. He had a photographic memory. He was a very bright man. Unfortunately, he also tended to lie about a lot of things. He made up his own resume, a lot of which was not true. And he had been elected to the Senate in 1946. He was coming up for re-election in 1952, and this was 1950. And a lot of people felt he hadn't done a lot, and he was getting a little concerned. So he got a group of advisors together in the colony in D.C., one of which was a Jesuit priest from Georgetown. And he said, what can I run on? I need an issue. And the Jesuit priest pushed very much anti-communism, traitors in the government. So that was kind of the basis for his
Jesuits?
a theme for his re-election campaign.
You may have heard of the Red Scare of the 1950s. The fear stoked by Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy that communists had infested the federal government. But a panic of a different shade,
homosexuals must not be handling top-secret material,
led to a much wider purge of gay employees that long outlasted McCarthy's tenure.
The pervert is easy prey to the blackmailer.
David K. Johnson is the author
That's true.
of the definitive history of what's come to be known as the Lavender Scare.
What is the Lavender Scare?
I describe it as a fear, right? A fear that permeated Cold War political culture. This fear that gay people were a threat to national security, that they had infiltrated the federal government, and that they needed to be systematically removed from government service.
The rooting out of homosexual employees became official policy with an executive order signed by newly elected President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953.
Wow.
5 and 10,000 people were fired or resigned, and we'll never know how many didn't pursue their dreams for fear of exposure. Other stories ended in the worst possible way. Drew Ferentz.
How many people were fired that weren't really even gay, I wonder?
In the U.S. Embassy in Paris when investigators confronted him with evidence that he was gay. Shortly after confessing, he killed himself.
Like, were they spying on people to find out if they're gay?
I saw lots of news reports, newspaper reports of single young men, government employees who committed suicide in Washington for no apparent reason.
How many gay federal employees actually spied for foreign governments?
There was not a single example of a gay man or lesbian who ever submitted to blackmail by a foreign agent. Not a single one.
And that's why they did it, because they would be blackmailed.
One of the
Not because the Bible says it's an abomination.
Country whose name is not remembered.
Because they'll be blackmailed by the commies.
Overshadowed the accomplishments of his life. Because in 1954 there was enormous stigma both about homosexuality and about suicide. As a politician, Lester Hunt was enormously well liked. This always has been a state where Democrats have a hard time getting elected. But the first time he ran for office, he was the top vote getter in his county, got elected to the legislature. People around the state then asked him to run for state office, and he became Secretary of State, then governor. He was somebody who took public service seriously, believed that if there was a problem to be solved, he needed to lead the way to get it done. And as a result, he became, as a Democrat, the most popular politician in the state. McCarthy was elected to the U.S. Senate 2 years ahead of Lester Hunt. The relationship between Hunt and McCarthy was bad from the very beginning. 3 months after Hunt was sworn into the Senate, he was appointed to a select committee to investigate Nazi war crimes at the Battle of the Bulge. At the end of World War II, Nazis had massacred dozens of American soldiers after the Battle of the Bulge, and after the war were tried as war criminals. Eventually, he stormed out of the committee, wrote his own report, accused Hunt and the other two of whitewashing the investigation. And so that was Lester Hunt's introduction, not just to Washington, but to Joe McCarthy. And Hunt would soon become the first major politician in this country to challenge McCarthy publicly, and he called him a liar and a drunk. Hunt and his wife lived in a house that overlooked some apartment buildings below, and he could see the patio behind Joe McCarthy's apartment, and he often talked about how he was forced to sit and watch McCarthy drink and cavort with women, and Joe McCarthy was just not Lester Hunt's type of guy. Hunt introduced legislation to allow citizens to sue members of Congress.
Oh my God, he drinks on his patio and talks to women.
The ways in which he had ruined so many lives. So the two of them were very antagonistic. At one point, an elevator operator in the Senate office building reported to Senator Hunt that he had overheard a conversation, McCarthy to another person, where McCarthy said, "I'm going to get that SOB if it's the last thing I do." And so they were at each other from the beginning. That relationship was very antagonistic. In June of 1953, Lester Hunt's son, a young adult, was arrested in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House by an undercover agent for soliciting homosexual sex. The background to that incident is really a fascinating piece of history, because when you look at the LGBT community before McCarthy, certainly there was discrimination, but homosexuals were not targeted. They seldom lost their job because of their sexual orientation. They had a vibrant social community in the large cities, including Washington, where there were parks and restaurants and bars and other places where they gathered without being hassled by policemen or others. McCarthy comes along, and of course he makes his Wheeling, West Virginia speech with the allegation that there were all of these communists in the State Department. When he couldn't prove that, Senator Stiles Bridges, who was one of the conspirators in the blackmail against Lester Hunt, very powerful. He was the Senate pro tem, in those days third in line to become president of the United States. He goes to McCarthy and says, "Look, you're having a hard time proving that there are communists in the State Department, but there are homosexuals. And we all know that homosexuals are security risks." So during one of the Senate hearings on McCarthy's allegations, the State Department testified, and they were asked. One of the senators said, "We're aware that you recently fired 91 people from State Department jobs. Is that because they were communists?" He said, no, they weren't communists, but they were homosexuals. And McCarthy and others began to conflate the issue of national security with sexual orientation, saying that homosexuals were security risks. Went so far as to make the outrageous claim that Adolf Hitler had assembled a lengthy list of American homosexuals with the goal of compromising their loyalty and turning them into spies for the Nazis. And that at the end of World War II, that list had fallen into Stalin's hands, and now Stalin was busy using that list to recruit spies for the Soviet Union.
Oh my gosh.
So in all of the growing fervor about the Cold War, this allegation overnight turned much of the country against homosexuals. New laws were passed. Congress put pressure on the District of Columbia police force to make arrests, to cite alleged homosexuals, so that
Could you imagine something like this now?
From federal government jobs. As a result, thousands lost their jobs.
Trump
the
was
DC
like,
Police Department created what they called the pervert
Biden likes the gays. They're going to, communist China are going to blackmail them.
To the bars and the restaurants and the parks to make eye contact with males. They were targeted at males, and arrest them. And that was one of the undercover officers Lester Hunt Jr. encountered that night in June of 1953. Initially, the U.S. attorney and the arresting police officer made the decision that the charges should be dismissed. Young Hunt was a seminarian student, never had any problem with the law, would have been kicked out of his seminary if this charge went forward, and so they said, we'll dismiss the charges. Well, Senators Bridges and Senator Welker, Herman Welker from Idaho, were the two leading Republicans then who learned about this. And so they called in the police officer, made all sorts of threats about him, claimed they had evidence that he had taken a bribe in order to drop the charges. Then they contacted a friend of Lester Hunt's, who was also a friend of Herman Welker's, a guy named Red Jacoby, who's a big name in Wyoming history. He was the athletic director in years when Wyoming won a national.
I don't know who this is talking.
And so Welker and Bridges call Jacoby and say, "Hey, look, you need to warn your good friend Lester Hunt that if he doesn't resign from the Senate immediately, we're going to make sure these charges against his son are reinstated, and we're going to get him convicted, and that'll be a problem for him politically." Well, Hunt said, "I won't be blackmailed," and
so they're blackmailing people.
And that October, young Hunt went to trial, a week-long trial in the District of Columbia.
Hunt is with Roy Cohn. That's where we're going to get to Roy Cohn.
Hunts were back in Wyoming celebrating Christmas. Somebody broke into their Washington, D.C. apartment, ransacked it, took nothing of value, but it was clear that they were looking for something that they thought would be there that would help smear Lester Hunt's name, and there, of course, was nothing. But if you can imagine the pressure that would put on Senator Hunt and his wife, that having had your privacy invaded like that. And so they talked for several months about whether or not to run again. Polls showed he would win overwhelmingly. And so in April of 1954, he announced for re-election. The senators, Welker and Bridges, continued to up the ante. They printed 25,000 posters, told Senator Hunt that if he didn't resign immediately, that they would put one of those in every mailbox in Wyoming. Now, the reason they needed him to resign immediately is that the control of the Senate was one seat to the Democrats. And here you have this Democrat in Republican Wyoming. If they could just get him to resign, the Republican governor in Wyoming would appoint a Republican, and control of the Senate would shift overnight. And so that's why that pressure. And then on the day before Lester Hunt kills himself, the reason happens. People who understand suicide say that those who think about it go through kind of a roller coaster, up and down. One day they feel like they want to take their life, the next day maybe not. But that for those who ultimately do take their life, there's something that happens in the hours preceding the suicide that is the final straw. And for Lester Hunt, that was a Joe McCarthy press conference on Friday afternoon, when McCarthy announces publicly that he intends to open a Senate hearing to investigate a Democratic member of the Senate who was involved in taking a bribe. That's the big piece of evidence that connects Joe McCarthy to the conspiracy, because the only people who had ever talked about a bribe were Senators Bridges and Welker back in the fall of 1953, when in a private meeting with a police officer, when they said, we have evidence that you took a bribe. Now, my sense of these things is that when that happened, when McCarthy made that announcement, though he felt he was innocent, he understood as well as anybody what it would mean to be dragged through a Joe McCarthy hearing and how much of your name would be smeared and your reputation ruined. He was already distraught because he knew that last October and September, if he had just resigned from the Senate then, his son could have been spared all of this, his wife could have been spared all of it, and their life could have started over. So now we're in June of 1954. His son has been convicted. There have been all these threats about the blackmail, and now he is looking ahead to a future where he's going to be a target of a McCarthy hearing. He's already announced he would not run for re-election. He pulled out of the race. But that wasn't enough for these people. They needed to get him out of the Senate now so that the control of the Senate could shift before the fall elections. And so my sense of it, after getting to know Hunt through his letters and his diaries and his speeches, is that that's the moment when he said, there's only one way out of this. And early the next morning, he took it. In my view, that was the end for Joe McCarthy. Just a few days before all of this happened were the Army McCarthy hearings that really started McCarthy's downfall and caused the public to begin to turn on McCarthy. But I think that when one of their own, a very popular colleague in the Senate, committed suicide. Others had committed suicide as a result of Joe McCarthy. But when it was one of their own, and a man as popular and well-liked as Hunt, I think that turned the tide solidly against McCarthy, and it was just a few months later that he was censured by the Senate, and the end came.
Wow, one senator.
McCarthy experienced a meteoric rise in national profile on February 9th, 1950, when he gave a Lincoln Day speech to the Republican Women's Club of Wheeling, West Virginia.
One senator called another senator, said he was going to investigate him, and he killed himself. That's pretty crazy.
Recordings of the speech exist. However, it is generally
agreed
that he produced a piece of paper that he claimed contained a list of known communists working for the State Department. McCarthy is usually quoted to have said, quote, "The State Department is infested with communists. I have here in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department," unquote. These sensationalist claims were picked up by the media and catapulted McCarthy into the limelight. The origin of the number 205 can be traced. In later debates on the Senate floor, McCarthy referred to a 1946 letter that then Secretary of State James Burns sent to Congressman Adolph J. Sabath. In that letter, Burns said State Department security investigations had resulted in, quote, "recommendation against permanent employment," unquote, for 284 persons, and that 79 of these had been removed from their jobs. This left 205 still on the State Department's payroll. In fact, by the time of McCarthy's speech, only about 65 of the employees mentioned in the Burns letter were still with the State Department, and all of these had undergone further security checks.
Then toward the end of the talk, he made what was the key to the talk and what started him on the road to what became known as McCarthyism. And I want to read exactly the words from the newspaper. And what he said was, "While I cannot take the time to name all the men in the State Department who have been named as members of the Communist Party and members of aspiring, I have here in my hand a list of 205, and he waved a piece of paper to the people, that were known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, who nevertheless are still working and shaping the policy in the State Department." Now, anybody that had the sense to hear, this was a terrific charge, because he was saying there were card-carrying communists in the State Department working as members of the American government, and the Secretary of State knew this, and they were still there. Well, then he went on. Of course, he continued his talk, and at the end, he said, well, now, it's a moral battle between good and evil. The chips are down. The chips are truly down. He kind of ended with that. And there were some questions and answers. He even invited the audience to talk to him. And there it lay. Now, WWVA, the local radio station, had carried his talk. One of the reporters from the Wheeling Intelligencer in the paper the next day had reported verbatim a lot of what he had said. When McCarthy was to go back to the airport, he was shown the paper, and the headline in the Wheeling paper was, "McCarthy charges the Reds hold U.S. jobs." And they said he was tickled with the headline, and it was beginning to dawn on him he had something here. And he was set up for a series of talks. The next day, he flew out to Salt Lake City. Then after that, he was going to go to Reno, Nevada, and another. He made the same statement in Salt Lake City, except he changed the number from 205 to, I think, 58. Then in his next talk, in next series of talks, the number went to 81. He was always changing the number because he had no list. He had no names. It was all a big lie. And only several weeks later in March, Herblock, the great cartoonist for the Washington Post, did a cartoon. And he had cans of tar.
It's almost like Alex Jones saying the Chi-Coms are everywhere.
Across it, McCarthyism. And he's the one that actually coined the phrase McCarthyism, which was you're tarring people, and usually for no good reason. In the last 2 years of Truman's time, 6,000 people left government. I mean, there were all kinds of questionnaires and security checks on people in government to an nth degree, and we lost experts in the State Department because of this crusade.
McCarthy himself.
I'm sure they did have spies, but not to this level.
And he was accused of continually revising both his charges and figures. In Salt Lake City, Utah, a few days later, he cited a figure of 57. And in the Senate on February 20th, 1950, he claimed 81. During a 5-hour speech, McCarthy presented a case-by-case analysis of his 81 quote-unquote loyalty risks employed at the State Department. It is widely accepted that most of McCarthy's cases were selected from the so-called quote-unquote Lee list, led by a former FBI agent named Robert E. Lee. The House investigators had reviewed security clearance documents on State Department employees and had determined that there were, quote, incidents of inefficiencies, unquote, in the security reviews of 108 employees. McCarthy hid the source of his list, stating that he had penetrated the quote-unquote Iron Curtain of State Department secrecy with the aid of, quote, some good loyal Americans in the State Department, unquote. In reciting the information from the Lee list cases, McCarthy consistently exaggerated, representing the hearsay of witnesses as facts, and converting phrases such as, quote, inclined towards communism, unquote, to, quote, a communist, unquote. The source of the Lee list obtained by McCarthy could have come directly from his friend and FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. The then 24-year-old Roy Cohn, prosecution member in the Rosenberg trial, was brought to the attention of Hoover, who recommended him to McCarthy. Cohn was subsequently appointed as his chief counsel. In response to McCarthy's charges, the Senate voted unanimously to investigate, and the Tidings Committee hearings were called. This was a subcommittee of the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, set up in February 1950 to conduct, quote, a full and complete study and investigation as to whether persons who are disloyal to the United States are or have been employed by the Department of State, unquote. Many Democrats were incensed at McCarthy's attack on the State Department of a Democratic administration and had hoped to use the hearings to discredit him. From its beginning, the Tidings Committee was marked by partisan infighting. Its final report, written by the Democratic majority, concluded that the individuals on McCarthy's list were neither communist nor pro-communist, and said the State Department had an effective security program. The Tidings report labeled McCarthy's charges a, quote, fraud and a hoax, unquote, and said that the result of McCarthy's actions was to, quote, confuse and divide the American people to a degree far beyond the hopes of the communists themselves, unquote.
Of course, 1952, there was a Republican victory, Eisenhower, and the Senate went Republican, which meant McCarthy got the chair position of two important committees, and one was an investigatory committee for government, and he took off. People would resign from government rather than come before his committee. People feared Joseph McCarthy because if you took him on in the Senate, you could often end up without a job. He had power. It's subpoena power. He had all kinds of power. The farther he went, he took on General George Marshall, the hero of World War II, and he just went after Marshall, and they thought surely Eisenhower would come out and just take him on. But he didn't. That wasn't Eisenhower's way.
What, as a communist, weren't we sending weapons and funding the Soviets in World War II?
And you didn't take on the Army too easily, and so the Army had a lawyer, Mr. Welsh.
A form for a commission in the Army. Senator McCarthy. I don't know the slightest thing about the application he filled out. Mr. Jenkins, you don't know one thing about that? Senator McCarthy, I never saw it. Senator, I have the application that David Shine filled out.
It does feel like some weird theater divide and conquer, doesn't it?
Don't tell me I notarized it.
Theater.
No, you merely signed it.
There were 36 days of hearings in 1954, and television came into the picture. And people began to see, and I must say, too, McCarthy was a heavy drinker, and he starting to go too far. He would interrupt people terribly. Point of order, point of order.
Mr. Wilson, point of order? I don't know what it is, but it's a point of something. My point of order is that Mr. Jenkins yesterday was imposed upon, and so was the Secretary of the Army, by having a doctored or altered photograph produced in this courtroom as if it were honest. A committee room and produced as if it were honest. And it was just rude and unruly, and they said actually people started to joke about point of order on the streets of America. But when TV showed for 36 days running the kind of guy he was, he lost a lot of public support. The Republicans lost the Senate in 1954, and so the Senate then decided to censor Joseph McCarthy. And they did by a vote of, I think, 67 to 22, and all the people voted for him were Republicans, and that was the end of him pretty much. At the end of the trail, there was never anybody in the government that they could prove was a card-carrying communist. Never. McCarthy had lost his base, and he kind of faded away. And this was a man that needed constant attention. When he walked in a room, he wanted to be noticed. He wanted to be the center of attention.
It almost gives cover for the real communist spies, too. They can focus on select people and look the other way, like a whitewash investigation.
Cohn assisted McCarthy's work for the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, becoming known for his aggressive questioning of suspected communists. Cohn preferred not to hold hearings in open forums, which went well with McCarthy's preference for holding quote-unquote executive sessions and quote-unquote off-the-record sessions away from the Capitol to minimize public scrutiny and to question witnesses with relative impunity. Cohn was given free rein in pursuit of many investigations, with McCarthy joining in only for the more publicized sessions. Cohn played a major role in McCarthy's anti-communist hearings. During the Lavender Scare, Cohn and McCarthy attempted to enhance anti-communist fervor in the country by claiming that communists overseas had convinced several closeted homosexuals employed by the U.S. federal government to pass on important government secrets in exchange for keeping their sexuality secret. President Dwight Eisenhower signed an executive order on April 29, 1953, to ban homosexuals from working in the federal government. Ironic, as at that time, Roy Cohn himself was a closeted homosexual. The intriguing Hank Greenspun, the publisher of the Las
And remember, J. Edgar Hoover was connected, and they had pictures of him in drag and doing gay stuff. They're all so hypocritical.
Vegas Sun newspaper, convicted arms trafficker to the terrorist group Haganah with Jewish mob connections, who was known to have sexual compromised material on politicians, claimed McCarthy was a homosexual.
Haganah, Jewish Haganah, the terrorist group? Okay, we got to back that up. 34 minutes.
Roy Cohn himself was a closeted homosexual. The intriguing Hank Greenspun, the publisher of the Las Vegas Sun newspaper, convicted arms trafficker to the terrorist group Haganah with Jewish mob connections, who was known to have sexual compromised material on politicians, claimed McCarthy was a homosexual.
Roy Cohn was doing the
next layer to
blackmailing.
the subject matter is understanding that J. Edgar Hoover was sexually compromised himself. Chicago outfit mobster John Rosselli said that Hoover had been arrested on charges of homosexuality in New Orleans in the 1920s. Hoover could have hardly picked a worse city to be compromised in. New Orleans police and officials were notoriously corrupt, puppets of the mafia boss and Meyer Lansky ally, Carlos Marcello. Meyer Lansky is also said to have obtained hard proof of Hoover's homosexuality and used it to neutralize the FBI as a threat to his own operations. In 1971, top Las Vegas mafia figure Irving Ash Resnick talked with the writer Pete Hamill. He spoke of Lansky as a genius and as the man who, quote, nailed J. Edgar Hoover, unquote. Hamill was told that Lansky had some pictures of Hoover in some kind of gay situation with Clyde Tolson, and that Lansky was the guy who controlled the pictures, and he had made a deal with Hoover to lay off. In 1990, Seymour Pollack, speaking of his close friend Meyer Lansky on the issue of what he had on Hoover, said, quote, Meyer was closed-mouthed. I don't think he even discussed the details of the Hoover thing with his brother. Lansky had more than information on Hoover. He had page, chapter, and verse. One night when we were sitting around in his apartment at the Rosita de Hornado,
Jewish mobster
talking about Hoover,
had blackmailed the
Meyer
head of the
laughed and
FBI.
said, I fixed that son of a bitch, didn't I? Unquote.
Amazing.
That was the reason why, for a long time, the mob had nothing to fear from the FBI.
Jewish mob.
During World War II, the OSS and Naval Intelligence collaborated with the Mafia. The Mafia assisted in protecting American ports from Axis agents, and with the Allied invasion of Sicily. Lansky assisted personally with those operations.
Lansky armed the Zionists, too, in 1948. Homosexual brothel in Brooklyn. Now they're gonna blackmail. This is why it's the unauthorized history, because if Americans saw stuff like this on the History Channel, they would see, wow, there's a lot of Jewish sounding names going on here.
OSS man John Weitz also
Rabbi?
confirmed that a former OSS
brief?
boss, James Jesus
Meyer
Angleton,
Lansky?
had shown him mob obtained sexually compromising photographs of Hoover with his boyfriend, Clyde Tolson, that were used for blackmail purposes.
Roy Cohn?
Angleton was head of OSS operations in Italy during World War II, overseeing collaborative operations with the Mafia. Cohn was described by Michael Cruz in Politico as, quote, a tangle of contradictions, a Jewish anti-Semite and a homosexual homophobe, vehemently closeted but insatiably promiscuous, unquote. Cohn's anti-Semitism and staunch anti-communism was portrayed as from one who strongly identified as a Jew, but who felt that Jewish organizations did not do enough to support those Jews who were advancing the fight against communism. Cohn was remembered by college friends as, quote, reacting almost violently to any Jew suspected of pro-communist leanings, unquote. A TV producer claimed that Cohn had said that, quote, although not all Jews are communists, but all communists are Jews, unquote. Cohn was also a member of the U.S. Department of Justice's prosecution team at the 1951 espionage trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Cohn's direct examination of Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, produced testimony that was central to the Rosenbergs' conviction and subsequent execution. On June 18, 1952, Cohn was awarded a plaque by the AJLAC for outstanding accomplishment in the cause of Americanism and his noteworthy devotion to the principles of Judaism.
American Jewish
Cohn
Congress.
is pictured here, receiving the award from Rabbi Benjamin Schultz,
AGC.
alongside his parents, Judge and Mrs. Albert Cohn. Albert Cohn was a New York State Supreme Court justice. He was a powerful man that rubbed shoulders with the Jewish elites, particularly a group of influential Jews that included Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, and Samuel Untermeyer.
Jacob Schiff funded the Bolshevik Revolution, right? That's it. So they really are controlling both sides. These circles here.
Significant influence over the presidency.
Oh, here we go. Samuel Untermeyer. Bjerknes writes a lot about him in his books. Morgenthau, another one. Cohn, Morgenthau, Schofield, Cyrus Schofield, and the Christian Zionists connect in here too. 1850s is where a lot of this started as well. Brandeis, another one. Schiff, Rothschild, Baruch, Woodrow Wilson. He was controlled.
Wilson.
Untermeyer funded Schofield.
Albert himself was influential in Democratic Party politics, and it was New York Governor Herbert Lehman that promoted Albert to the New York Supreme Court. Albert was also president of B'nai B'rith's Rehoboth Lodge 38.
His dad was the president of B'nai B'rith Lodge. That's right. Trump's mentor. Trump and Roger Stone's mentor. And this guy. Oh my gosh, they're all B'nai B'rith. All the names we've been seeing about in the series. Mayer, Baruch, Magnin. Wow. This is excellent. This is so good for normie friendly too. American Jewish League Against Communism.
Roy Cohn and Bernard Baruch. Besides both of their links to the AJLAC and B'nai B'rith, the year before he died, Bernard Baruch gave Roy Cohn a character reference when Cohn was first being prosecuted for perjury and obstruction of justice. As mentioned earlier, Cohn caught the attention of J. Edgar Hoover during the Rosenberg trial. Hoover and Cohn maintained a relationship for over 20 years, exchanging Christmas gifts.
Gay
relationship. The relationship adds fuel to the fire that Hoover himself was said to be homosexual.
Yeah.
M. Wesley Swearingen, an FBI agent from 1951 to 1977, writes in his memoir, FBI Secrets, an Agent's Exposé, about the long-standing rumors within the Bureau concerning the relationship between Hoover and Associate Director Clyde.
Cohn had powerful contacts, including Ronald Reagan, CIA Director William Casey, and Rupert Murdoch. That's the head of Fox News.
Tolson, which include allegations that Hoover ignored the mafia for decades because...
According to James Rothstein, Cohn admitted that he was part of a sexual entrapment operation that included compromising politicians with children. I remember one of Whitney Webb's articles got into his connections with some hotel or something where they would do this blackmail at, like the previous version of Epstein.
They had sexual compromise material.
Les Wexner.
Chasing ghosts or imaginary communists gave Hoover's FBI something to focus on while they turned a blind eye to mob activity. Interestingly, Cohn would later go on to represent mob boss Anthony Fat Tony Salerno when the FBI began cracking down on mob activity after Hoover died.
Cohn was disbarred for unethical and unprofessional conduct. I breathed American Jewish League against communism. Oh, and John Birch Society too.
Fallout of the
Wow.
Army McCarthy hearings.
Alex Jones is connected to John Birch Society. His family, they said they used to have meetings around the table at his house.
The anti-communism movement was on life support. However, there were still a loyal base of supporters invested in the AJLAC and their McCarthyism project. AJLAC's Rabbi Schultz attempted to rehabilitate Roy Cohn by launching a series of gala evenings for Cohn to take place in various locations on the East Coast as a way of keeping active with their base supporters and donors. Time magazine described the first of these dinners, held on July 29th in Manhattan, as, quote, one enchanted evening, unquote. Schultz awarded Cohn with a plaque, quote, in recognition of his battle for his God and country, which has inspired America, unquote, stating that, quote, the plain people of America know that the loss of Cohn is like the loss of a dozen battleships, unquote. Rabbi Schultz introduced McCarthy to the attendees, referring to him as his, quote-unquote,
Hold on. The plain people of America know that the loss of Cohn is like the loss of a dozen battleships.
hero. However, after his condemnation and censure, McCarthy declined both physically and emotionally. He became a, quote, pale ghost of his former self, unquote, in the words of Fred J. Cook. It was reported that McCarthy suffered from cirrhosis of the liver and was frequently hospitalized for alcohol abuse. Reluctantly, the AJLAC crowd realized it was time to take a new direction.
Well, that's going to have to be part 5, the new direction. McCarthy became addicted to morphine. All right, and there was part 4. Excellent job. I can't wait. I wonder how many more there is to go. This just came out 4 hours ago. I'll put this link up here if everybody wants to go back and rewatch these, or just give them a like and a share and a follow and support. This is some excellent work. Excellent work from John Swin and Expose the Enemy and Jeremy Roth-Kushel. ExposeTheEnemy.com if you want to follow any of the rest of his work. John Swin. I'm really glad I watched it. It is much better even than I thought. I thought it was going to be good, but it was far better than I thought it was going to be. Very well done. I'm going to have to share this. I already shared it. It deserves so many more views and very important information. I will be back. Thanks everyone for watching. Let's see. Duval says all politicians are blackmailed by the tribe today. Maybe not all, but certainly a lot in some way, one or another. Poim Andres says, we met at shop. Thanks again for giving me a shirt. Oh, what's up? Cool. Poim Andres. Yes, I definitely remember that. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I think I am going to post this to BitChute and Odysee. I want more people to see it. It was definitely worth it. And again, share the links, thumbs up. NoMoreNews.org. I will be back with some more videos. I'm going to be putting out, I know I've been a little slow the last week or 2 weeks putting out videos. I'm going to try to get back at it on the grind. Put together, this is inspiring. I want to do, it's been a while since I've done a documentary-esque video. I might have to put in some work and try to get out something out there really good. Put a lot of effort into one video. All right, guys, thank you all for watching. Support the channel if you can. NoMoreNews.org. Subscribe star, a couple dollars a month if you value my work. You want to help keep me going. Keep the anti-Zog videos coming. Please support, a couple dollars a month. Keep this viable. And appreciate all the support. people donating tonight. And I will see you guys all again very soon. Take care.